Fire Emblem is a very numbers-based game. Of course, that comes with the territory of playing a strategy game. But I bring this up as most challenge runs choose to target those numbers. What happens when you play a numbers game and remove that part of the formula? Such a question leads to the common challenge of a zero growths run. It also leads to other ideas, such as maxing out enemy stats, setting player stats to 0, or even trying negative growths runs. I love seeing people do these kinds of challenges as it shows off an impressive level of skill and knowledge over the game. However, I noticed there's one stat that people like to avoid negatively modifying, that being movement. Of course, there are runs out there where enemies have 99 movement, but there's never an attempt at the inverse. No one's tried to play Fire Emblem while deleting their own movement. Of course, there are reasons for this. Being able to move across the field in order to kill enemies and reach your objective is a core part of the gameplay. If you can't move in order to beat a map, then you're effectively soft-locked. However, there are some games that provide other forms of movement. Things such as warp and rescue magic, or perhaps movement skills that allow you to reposition nearby units. Issue is, it takes time to gain access to these forms of movement. And while things like warp are quite powerful, they're also very limited. So, case closed. It's impossible to play Fire Emblem with zero movement. Or it would be if pair-up mechanics didn't exist in Awakening and Fates. See, even when you lack a movement stat, you can still pair up with a unit adjacent to you, and that unit can then drop you on any tile adjacent to them. This allows two units to work together in order to move forward, at a pace of one tile per turn. So yeah, of course no one's done this challenge. Even if it's possible, it's stupid and wastes your time. Hence why I will claim my spot as the only person stupid enough to attempt this kind of run. I may not be the most skilled Fire Emblem player, but I can be quite patient when necessary. As such, I made a zero movement mod for Fates, as I'm more comfortable with it than Awakening. From there, we can begin a fresh file, and the challenge is impossible. I know I went on my whole preamble about pair-ups making this possible, but Xander dashes any chances of this working. Truth is, I expected this and knew it wouldn't be possible. However, I wanted to attempt this run despite knowing that. I wanted to see how many maps are possible. As such, let's keep a count on how many maps can actually be completed. With that out of the way, let's start the journey from the beginning. I'm playing through Fates on Hard Classic, as that's what I usually do, and it provides a good baseline difficulty. As for my Corrin, they have a boon in defense and bane in magic. This choice was very deliberate, as we're going to have to sit there and take damage with no way to retreat. The magic bane is due to me having no plans to use a magical Corrin, instead planning to make use of their talent. And speaking of talents, it was a toss-up between Mercenary and Fighter. The plan is to eventually make Corrin a hero for access to Soul and Axebreaker. The question becomes whether Fighter or Mercenary skills are more useful. While having HP plus 5 and potentially dipping into Rally Strength could be nice, I decided the Mercenary skills are better in this situation. First of all, Strong Riposte will give us an additional 3 damage when counterattacking. Given we'll be sitting and waiting for the enemy to attack us, this essentially turns Strong Riposte into a permanent damage buff. The other Mercenary skill, Good Fortune, is also somewhat helpful here. It'll give us a chance to restore 20% of our HP at the start of each turn, based on our luck. It's obviously not a guaranteed thing to rely on, but it's a chance to provide more leniency in our turn economy. So, yeah, Mercenaries seem to be the best fit for this kind of run. With Little Free created, we can finally begin the game. The prologue is unchanged. Since there's no need to move in the first place, it's easily completable. And even if Takumi couldn't move, the map forcibly ends itself whether or not you manage to kill the Lancer. The scripted nature of this map makes it impossible to softlock. Chapter 1 is the first impossible map. We start off far from Xander and have no way of reaching him. And even if I added a unit to pair up with, you're actually completely locked out of using the mechanic until Chapter 3. It's for similar reasons that Chapter 2 is impossible. We don't start off adjacent to our retainers, and even if we did, we wouldn't be able to make use of pair-ups to move around. There is some hope thanks to the enemy AI being highly aggressive in this chapter. However, Kaze is a 2-range unit, and Felicia is my only 2-range attacker. If she dies before Kaze, then this map is essentially impossible to complete. There is, however, a very slim chance this could be possible. Whether that be Kaze choosing to stand adjacent to one of my units, or him managing to miss his 99% hit on Felicia. I would have to have impossibly good luck to win this. As such, I implemented a 3-strike rule for maps here. I have to make at least 3 attempts at a map if there's no obvious soft lock. This is to see if luck has some effect on completion of the map, or if different tactics could make it possible. If it's clear I can't do much to make a situation better after 3 attempts, then I can temporarily mark the map as impossible and move on. This rule is not to absolve me of the effort to make things work. It mostly applies to the tutorial maps, as I have very little control over the setup for these chapters. I will only skip chapters if I feel there is absolutely nothing I can do to make a map workable. As such, Chapter 2 is one of those chapters that will be hit by the 3-strike rule. As far as I'm concerned, this map is impossible on Hard Classic with Felicia, unless you get improbably good luck. However, that doesn't make it impossible. See, if we were to play as a woman, we could have Jacob here instead of Felicia. As you can see here, he's a bit bulkier, allowing him to survive a few more attacks and dish out higher damage. However, he just barely misses the damage threshold to kill Kaze before dying. At least on hard. If we bump the difficulty down to normal classic, then Jacob can easily take down Kaze. He will, of course, die on this map, but by killing Kaze, I can just barely manage to claim the victory here. Which means this map is, in fact, possible if you specifically play as a woman on normal. I specifically say as a woman due to the fact that Felicia still needs to get lucky if she wants to kill Kaze. I personally did not claim a victory in my normal mode attempts with her. Since my only victory on this map exists in an alternate timeline from the file I played the game on, I will put an asterisk on the final results here. Chapter 2 is possible, but it requires specific conditions I did not fulfill in my main playthrough. Moving on to Chapter 3, we finally have access to the pair-up mechanic. With this tool on my belt, I can finally start moving across maps. And thankfully, Gunter starts right next to Little Freak, meaning I can easily move to pick up Felicia and slowly make my way to the boss. I chose to take the bottom Dragon Vein as I know I have no chance against the Archer pincer attack. It's far easier to just lure over the Samurai and Archer next to the boss. Once they're taken care of, I can use the nearby fort to heal Felicia. And once she's at full health, I can finally head over to the boss. The danger of this specific path is that entering the boss's attack range also enters the nearby Archer's range. Not to mention it also triggers the Sky Knight reinforcements. My first attempt led to the deaths of Felicia and Gunter, making the map impossible even if Little Freak survived. If I don't have at least 2 units, then it'll be impossible to move, and I need that movement in order to reach the stationary boss. I eventually realized the best method was to have Little Freak be the one in range of the boss due to having the highest defense. With Felicia supporting him, he had the speed to survive the boss's onslaught as he wouldn't get doubled. Meanwhile, the Archer would end up attacking Gunter, who is hiding behind Little Freak. This would allow Little Freak to kill the Archer, while the Sky Knights would get themselves killed by attacking Gunter. Once all the mobile enemies were down, I could remove myself from the boss's attack range and heal my party back up to full. Since the area was now clear, it was pretty easy to have Little Freak and Gunter approach and kill the boss. Doing so took 70 turns. Seeing how awful it was just getting here, I chose not to risk throwing my progress away for a bit of experience from the Northern Archers. So I ended the map here. As such, we can begin Chapter 4, which acts as a sort of breather. Ryoma can still run across the map, and will thus steal all the experience we could get from the Faceless. Sadly, he's not fast enough to save his sisters on his own, and this means we'll miss out on a concoction and can't make use of free healing here. However, we also can't just sit back and let this map play itself. While Ryoma will kill most of the Faceless, he ends up ignoring the 4 standing on the central mountain. This means I have to slowly drag Little Freak, Rinka, and Kaze over the boss. With some careful setup, I can drop Little Freak in the boss's attack range and have Rinka immediately pair up with him to provide strength and defense. Since Kaze dropped us in range, he will be safely hidden behind Little Freak, able to weaken the Faceless with his shuriken. By continuing this use of tactical pairing and transferals, I can safely kill all 4 Faceless here. Sadly, our success is brought to a halt with Chapter 5. Our starting position on this map isn't great. We're immediately rushed by a combination of mages and mercenaries. This is an issue as none of my units can handle both enemy types. The mages will easily kill Rinka, while the mercenaries can tear Kaze apart. And my support units obviously don't stand a chance. This alone can make the start of the map rather difficult. However, with careful movement and a bit of luck, it is possible to survive the initial onslaught. I managed as much in one of my attempts. The real problem with this map is the boss. The mysterious figure here is a decently strong swordmaster. Normally you're supposed to have Corrin kill him as they temporarily have boosted stats. Problem is that Corrin can't be paired up with on this map. So even if I could defeat all the enemies here, I'd just be soft-locked as Rinka and Kaze cannot defeat the boss. Though there is one other unit on this map who can defeat him, that being Ryoma. Most of the time, Ryoma will just die in his single-minded pursuit to kill the Swordmaster. But if he gets lucky, he can kill the boss without any input from the player. This means that there's a theoretical chance for this map to be beatable. Though this would require a combination of me managing to clear the enemies on the top half of the map, while hoping RNG lets Ryoma defeat the boss. Once the boss is dead, Ryoma would then move to clear the rest of the map. However, this is only theoretically possible. I haven't personally had this happen to me, and it could take hundreds of resets just to find the victorious result. As such, this map was also hit by the 3-strike rule, even if I know it could be possible. As such, I quickly played through this map normally. I tried to evenly spread the experience, and held myself back from the Azura singing grind. Even if I felt this map was nearly impossible, I wanted my characters to be somewhat faithful to where I felt they would be if this map was done without movement. With the tutorial maps completed, I can now say with certainty that 4 out of 6 of these maps are possible. That's a 66% victory rate, which counts as a passing grade. But now we've come to the problem of figuring out which path to take. Of course, based on the title of this video, you already know what path we're going down. And there's a reason for this. While I'm a big fan of Revelation, Chapter 19 has a high chance of being impossible. This is due to it having a 20-turn limit, and the escape point being 19 tiles away from the closest deployment slot. It could be possible, but with everything at play, it's unlikely. Conquest, on the other hand, is a very demanding path. There's no chance to make up for lost money or experience. And I'm not one for planning things out as much as Conquest demands of me. Not to mention, its hostile map design and having multiple maps with turn limits doesn't mesh well with a lack of movement. This leaves us with Birthright. Since nearly every map has either rout the enemy or defeat the boss as the victory condition, we can take it at our own pace. And that doesn't necessarily mean that Birthright will be easy to get through or even possible. It just means that the game won't be actively working against us, providing us with the highest chance of success. To help drive that point home for everyone, it is completely up to RNG how many people you'll lose to Chapter 6 of Birthright. If you're lucky, then Xander will get himself killed on Ryoma before any other enemy unit moves to kill one of your own. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy losing a dancer or ninja. Thankfully, I got through without any losses, allowing me to attempt Chapter 7 with a healthy army. Now, to the surprise of some, this next map actually requires some level of planning. Because the enemy will automatically start rushing your location, I need to create a choke point as quickly as possible. There is thankfully a nearby doorway that I can set up a unit to cover just in time. Of course, this is only possible as I now have access to unit preparation. I can make sure Rinka has the closest starting position to the choke point, and that someone is paired up with her to provide movement. Which is another reason why this challenge works so well in Fates. In case anyone forgot, you can pair units up on the preparation screen. Now, I never have to worry about non-adjacent starting tiles. Back to handling this map though, I also have to make sure someone starts next to Tsubaki. This is due to there being some outlaws on this map that can kill him. And this might be a surprise, but my plan for a future map actually hinges on Tsubaki's survival. Once Tsubaki is safe and Rinka fortifies my defenses, all that remains is to wait. Because of how the enemy AI is programmed, almost every single enemy on this map will aggro with no input from me. That means that Rinka and Little Freak can kill the entire enemy army by blocking a single tile. Or most of it. Once Silas is dead, I then have to slowly inch my way across the map to kill the stationary enemies. It's easy to handle, just time-consuming. Before moving on to Chapter 8, I decided to handle the Mozu paralog. Now, before anyone gets their hopes up, I can't save Mozu. I'm simply too slow to reach her. The actual reason why I'm here is to do some support grinding. I'm most interested in getting Little Freak and Tsubaki up to A support as soon as possible. Of course, there is a cap to how many support points you can get per map, so I brought along Silas and Kaze to gain their own supports as well as some experience. I'm hoping to use these two in the long run, and it's best to start them up now rather than suffer trying to get them up to speed later down the line. With Tsubaki and Little Freak now at B support, I started Chapter 8. Aside from Mozu, this is our first instance of allied units that I need to talk to in order to recruit. Usually these units run towards Korin to recruit themselves. However, due to their lack of movement, they are stuck in place. This is an issue as Hinoka and her retainers start next to a samurai and Oni savage. Both Azama and Setsuna are incapable of defending themselves here, which makes it hard for me to reach them before they die. Now, as much as I love Setsuna, I was convinced that archers wouldn't be very useful in this challenge run. They easily get trapped due to their inability to attack at one range. And since we'll mostly be reliant on counterattacks, the archer class line is nearly worthless. They aren't defensive walls and are more tuned towards player phase gameplay. This meant that I was willing to let Setsuna die. However, I really wanted Azama to survive. While it may seem counterintuitive to want a defenseless unit, Azama is probably one of the best units for this challenge. His personal skill of Divine Retribution allows him to damage enemies that manage to attack him, though only adjacent foes. However, what I'm more interested in is his class. As a healer, he'll be able to keep my units alive without them having to waste their turn economy on using healing items. Not to mention that as Azama gains levels, he'll become a force to be reckoned with. His personal HP and defense growths are phenomenal, and his decent resistance growth is made even better with his monk class. Combine that with learning renewal at Great Master level 5, and he'll be nearly unkillable. Of course, this is a plan that will take a long time to see through, but it'll be well worth the payoff. As such, I had Sakura use a rescue to save Azama. With him next to a healer, I could keep him alive while slowly moving Little Freak towards Hinoka. Since I didn't need archers, there was no reason to waste a rescue on Setsuna, and thanks to her guard Naginata, I didn't need to worry about Hinoka dying. While Little Freak and Tsubaki were focused on recruiting Hinoka, I kept my other units huddled together at our starting point. This provided me with a decent defensive position to handle the enemy units that automatically aggro. And once they were down, it would then be possible to move forward and carefully clean up the map. The only real problem that remains is Fuga. Thankfully, Rinka's high defense allows her to easily trade blows with him, and my nearby healers can keep her safe, making sure she has at least 7 HP to survive 2 critical hits. Of course, the hit rates leave something to be desired, but it's the safest strategy available to me, and it eventually works out. Chapter 9 then provides us with a double-edged sword. While we start off in a position that's easy to defend, we're also surrounded by outlaws. This is terrifying when you consider that 2 of my main units are Sky Knights. And even aside from that, being surrounded means it's harder for me to escape my enclosure and recruit Oboro. If I'm too slow and unlucky with enemy movement, then Oboro will die. And the thing is, I really want to recruit Oboro. Outside of my biases, she is a good unit with a rather helpful class for this challenge. But my first attempt lost her to the mage reinforcements. Thankfully, on my second attempt, all the enemy reinforcements went after my main army huddled up in the center of the map. This allowed Little Freak to recruit Oboro and Hinata without having to waste a rescue. As I work on clearing the map, I should probably explain why I'm so interested in using Oboro. Aside from my lance infantry bias, Oboro is just a really well-rounded unit, with 40s across the board when it comes to her personal growths. Well, other than her HP and res at 30 and her magic at 20. The other reason I want her is for her spear fighter class. Much like Oboro, it's a well-rounded class that focuses on balancing attack and defense. And this is the closest I'll come to having a defensive wall without access to the Knight class. It's also one of 3 classes in this game that has access to a movement skill. And speaking of movement skills, I may as well talk about them now. As per the name, these are skills that allow you to move around other units. They are Shelter, Swap, and Shove. Shelter is probably the most well-known of these skills. Being able to pick up a unit adjacent to you allows you to do some interesting stuff to mess with your turn economy. Sadly, I don't have much access to Shelter as it's a Cavalier skill, which is a Norian class. However, it's the least useful skill for this run, as picking up a unit isn't great in terms of giving me good movement. It's better as a panic button to save a nearby unit who's already used their turn. Swap is a very situationally helpful skill learned by spear fighters. It allows you to use the turn of one unit to swap spaces with an adjacent ally. Because all my units will be huddled together, this can be an extremely useful skill. It allows me to have units switch spaces without needing to go through a complex movement procedure that wastes a ton of units' turns. Not to mention using swap will only cost me 1 action, and it puts units into a preferable position, such as pulling someone back to safety. Combine its usefulness with how easy it is to make spear fighters, and it ends up becoming one of my most used skills in this run. Shove is the last of our movement skills, learned by the Oni Savage. As per the name, it allows you to push a unit forward 1 tile. Now, this isn't all too useful in normal gameplay. However, in this specific challenge, Shove effectively allows you to double someone's movement for 1 turn. If 2 units are paired up, shoved, and then separated, that essentially allows you to move 2 spaces. Of course, it requires some setup, but it can be extremely useful in certain situations. Outside of setup, the major downside is the lack of Oni Savage access. Training Hayato doesn't seem feasible, and Hinata isn't all that great of a unit, which just leaves us with Rinka. All this is to say that movement skills can be helpful, but it requires a level of strategy and unit planning to make effective use of. And we start using these on this chapter. Since Rinka has reached level 10, I can have her shove Hinoka adjacent to Zola. This allows me to have Hinoka immediately start chipping away at him, without having to put another character at risk to help her slowly approach the boss. After all, a major weakness of my army right now is their generally low res. Though, I guess there's also Kaze, who easily handles Zola once he's in range. As I return to my castle, Little Freak ends up at A support with Tsubaki. I was thankfully able to get there so fast due to taking chances to grind out support points, as well as taking advantage of the private quarters. I don't need this friendship for a few maps, but it was good to get it out of the way now. However, this good news must be followed up by a terrifying map. I don't know of anyone who really likes the Mokushu maps, and that point is emphasized by the fact that I hear everyone refer to it as Ninja Hell. This is a sentiment even I feel as someone who has put over 1,000 hours into the game. Since I was dreading this, I chose to end my second stream of the challenge with a quick test run of the map to plan out a good strategy over the weekend. As such, my army was a bit of a skeleton crew. I mostly just brought along my main attackers to see how well they could survive against the ninja onslaught. Tsubaki was only there to move around my soul healer, and Azura was there to recruit Takumi. Thankfully, I did remember exactly where Takumi shows up, so I was able to instantly recruit him. Now, you may be wondering why I would recruit Takumi when I said I thought archers would be useless. The main reason is because he starts out as an enemy, and getting shot in the back would hurt a lot. The other is that I can use him as sacrificial bait. However, as I was stuck standing still at the start of the map, I slowly came to a realization. The most difficult part of this map is the start of it. The enemy has a blockade set up in this triangular formation to prevent you from moving forward. With how this formation is set up, a nearby enemy can run over and easily initiate a dual strike against you, especially if that enemy has access to 1 to 2 range weapons. And then you have to consider how all the nearby enemies that instantly aggro are ninja, diviners, and archers. This variety prevents you from having one unit capable of tanking this blockade. Rinka will die to the diviners, while my ninja will slowly be destroyed by the physical attackers. Obito or Silas could stand a chance against the blockade, but the ninja would slowly deplete their strength, not to mention how I only have access to 1 javelin. Hinoka would be the strongest unit against this blockade due to her amazing defensive stats combined with her guard Naginata, but the archers would take her down quickly thanks to her flying weakness. By all means, this is a very well-made blockade that punishes you for rushing through the map, especially when you take into account the annoying trap placed right in front of it. However, this means my greatest weakness becomes my greatest strength here. As I said, the blockade punishes you for rushing the enemy, but I can't even move. So the most intimidating map becomes a game of sitting still at the start while letting the enemy rush towards me and die. Now, I did say that the combination of enemies here is very dangerous for any one unit, but they chose to disperse their damage among my 3 sets of paired up units. And not to mention how Azura and Azama standing nearby helped keep them healthy. What was supposed to be a throwaway attempt slowly became a genuine try. With the danger of the reinforcements and the blockade out of the way, I could slowly push forward. Since the only enemies who remained were ones that move upon entering their range, I returned to my normal defensive play. It was honestly a pretty off-putting experience for me, one that can be easily summarized by something I said on stream. I don't like how pleasant this map has been now that I've dealt with the reinforcements. It's very upsetting. Like, what the hell? This is the annoying map that everyone hates. What the fuck? You're telling me it's easy? Of course, you may point out that if I'm stuck on traps due to my slow movement, my HP will end up dangerously low. This would leave me extremely susceptible during enemy phase, which is partially true. However, due to how my movement works, I activate map triggers 1 tile later than you're supposed to. This gives me a bit more wiggle room when walking across trap terrain, and I'll almost always kill enemies around a trap before actually activating it. Once I'm past a trap, I can then have my units stand near Azura to heal up their HP thanks to healing Descant. Having Azama heal can make things go by faster, but I didn't bring a bunch of Festals as I didn't think I'd beat this attempt. This also meant I couldn't make full use of my usual strategy at the end of this map to get Azura and a healer up to level 20. And that's not to say I did no grinding. After Rinka defeated Kotaro, I dropped her on the spikes to grind healing experience on Azama. While it didn't get him to level 20, he did reach level 15, which was nice for reducing the grind in the future. And we'll still be able to promote him soon. For now though, we have to focus on Chapter 11. This is usually a free chapter, as you'll now have Setsuna and Takumi to deal with an army made entirely of flyers. Of course, Reina also shows up on this map and will immediately approach Korn to recruit herself, adding a 3rd bow user to your ranks. However, all of Reina's usual benefits are completely moot thanks to her lack of movement. Flyers don't really provide anything outside of being weak to bows in this challenge, and if a flyer wants to explore flyer-only terrain, they'll need a second flying unit paired up with them. Not like any of that matters here when these sides of the ship prevent my flyers from being able to escape. Though I can actually take advantage of this. I end up using a rescue to save Reina as she'll provide some support to my army. From there, I start setting up my units in a triangle around Sakura. This is so that everyone gets the defense buff from Sakura's quiet strength. Not to mention the fact that it makes it easier for her to heal everyone as they'll all be within range of her festals. Now, this might seem a bit dangerous as I have no way of protecting Sakura from behind. However, I've nestled everyone against the partition we started next to. Partitions are a type of terrain that only flyers can pass through, but this movement is limited solely to passing through. You can't stand on these tiles. The partitions that make up the sides of the ship are 2 tiles wide, and the maximum attack range any enemy has on this map is 2. This means that the enemy has to fly onto the ship in order to attack any of my units, and with a 2-unit buffer around Sakura, no one is capable of reaching her without killing someone on the outer layer of my formation. I do end up making a mess of this formation during the chapter, so I'll properly explain it later when I develop it into its true form. Back to dealing with the enemy here, I can stay huddled like this the entire map, making slight shifts to my position as need be. This is thanks to the fact that all enemies on this map slowly aggro on you. Every enemy has a set number of turns they wait before rushing your units, including the boss. I assume this was made as a sort of softlock prevention in case all of your flyers die, or your units are too weak to bait the enemy towards your archers. This technically makes the map beatable by doing absolutely nothing. But only technically, as I can't just put down physical tanks and call it a day. I obviously need enough units to keep my support units like Sakura safe, not to mention the enemy variety on this map. It would be one thing if everyone were Sky Knights and Wyvern Riders. If that were the case, then I would have let Reina die and only deployed Rinka. With her high defense and a throwing club, she'd be able to handle anything. However, just like with the last chapter, there's an assortment of enemies here to throw a wrench in those plans. The game has now begun sprinkling in promoted enemies, and among them are Malignites. Since Malignites are the only flying class with access to magic, they all show up with tomes equipped on this map. Since Rinka has very low resistance, she would die rather quickly to these guys. This would turn Hinoka into the better option for soloing this map thanks to her high resistance and defense. Even if lances are at a disadvantage against all the enemy axe users, she has the stats to pull through. There is a problem though. There are enemy Kinshi Knights here. Hinoka would be obliterated by them. As such, I have to deploy a variety of units and be careful about enemies hitting their weaknesses. Thankfully, with Takumi here, I have a unit who can easily delete nearby problem enemies. Of course, his use is limited due to his 2-range lock, but by taking advantage of enemy AI attack priorities, Takumi can get some good use. I should also note that partway through this map, Hinoka reached level 10. This got her camaraderie, which will be an extremely helpful skill this run. If my army is going to be stuck together, then I may as well take advantage of free healing. And that's the only reason I kept her as a Sky Knight for this long. Upon obtaining the skill, I had her use my only heart seal to become a spear fighter, much like Oboro. This allows Hinoka to be pretty much the same unit as before, just without the flying weakness now. Now, while I may have made this map sound easy, that's only because the first half of the map has a very casual pace. The entire second half of the map initiates their rush AI at the same time, instead of the staggered approach of the first half. This meant that once the boss started moving, I would have an army of flyers surrounding me. It would be a test of my strategic abilities, while also being a bit of a stat check on my units. The most dangerous enemies here were the boss and the only remaining Malignite. Thankfully, the Wyvern Lord was focused on trying to kill Oboro, who was fairly capable at tanking his attacks. And while the Malignite got one attack off on Rinka, he was easily killed by Kaze. Not to mention my 2 nearby healers easily topped off Rinka's health. One might note that the Wyvern Riders should be very dangerous for my ninja, though. And yes, they technically are. However, Kaze and Saizo are incapable of one-rounding the Wyverns. And because the Falcon Knight on this map has a Festal, this actually breaks the enemy AI. Because of this one Falcon Knight, even if a Wyvern is capable of attacking or killing one of my units, they're not going to do anything. Instead, they'll fly over to the supposed healer and wait for healing before attacking again. This is a problem for them, as the Falcon Knight will refuse to heal anyone in favor of attacking. As such, I have an interesting trade-off, where I can keep the Falcon Knight alive to minimize the number of enemies attacking me. However, as a promoted unit, they do a lot of damage and could easily kill Kaze thanks to his low defense. Having to kill this enemy for Kaze's safety should have ended the attempt here. All the injured enemies would move in to kill him now that their healing AI was disabled. But thanks to 2 lucky dodges, he barely managed to survive. This left only the boss alive, and in range of both ninja. An attack from Saizo would do major damage. Of course, his shuriken only deals 7 damage, but the boss's counter would bring Saizo below half health. This causes Saizo to trigger Pyrotechnics, which will stack with Poison Strike to deal 13 damage. Since out-of-battle skills can't kill, I had Kaze land one final blow to finish the map. While this chapter may not seem all too interesting on paper, I think it really highlights the way this challenge works. It's a challenge that requires a depth of knowledge about the game to come up with smart tactics while also relying heavily on luck. This also marks the true beginnings of me learning how to play the game without movement. Of course, none of this learning matters if I can't get past the Opera House. This is an escape map, so Little Freak needs to reach the goal in order to win. There are technically 3 methods to do so. The usual easy method is to have a flyer ferry your Corrin to the escape point, as it's rather close to your starting position. Since there are no enemy flyers, there's no one who can follow you over the water tiles, making this the safest and fastest way to complete the map. However, we can't do that under our current movement restrictions, as Little Freak is a grounded unit. The other options involve pushing your way through the enemy army. You can follow the entire long-winded route that snakes through the map, but Xander will block your way. And it should be noted that he has stats very similar to those he'll have in Chapter 26. Chances are that he'll probably kill my units as they are now. So that leaves us with the third option of fighting our way to the Dragon Vein in the center of the map, right? Using this Dragon Vein will turn the water into ice, allowing me to cross the map while avoiding Xander. It would release a few enemies trapped on the stranded gondolas, but if I'm careful, it should be fine. The thing is, this is actually a fake choice. While playing on hard mode, options 2 and 3 are the same thing. This is because Xander will appear on turn 1 and immediately rush Corrin. Because of my slow movement, that means he'll attack me before I can even escape my starting position. This would make fighting Xander my only option to get through this map. But again, he has endgame stats, making him very dangerous to go up against. If it had been possible to focus experience on Oboro and Hinoka in previous chapters, then this wouldn't be a problem. I could have potentially provided them with enough strength and defense to solo the entire map. However, I didn't have that kind of luxury. I could spend time grinding skirmishes now to make them capable of killing Xander, but that would take a while, and I wanted to see how much I could get done without having to rely on major grinding sessions. I could also feed a unit stat boosters so they can handle him without the grind, but I wanted to hold on to those for an emergency. This brings us back to option 1, and something I've been planning before I even started the game. See, I lied about my talent options. I wasn't just choosing between Fighter and Mercenary. Wyvern Rider and Sky Knight were also on the table. After all, I knew I needed Corrin to be a flyer if I wanted a consistent way to beat this map. They would just have to use pair-up strats with either Hinoka or Tsubaki to cross the water. However, I removed the flying talents from my choices since you can also obtain classes through friendship or marriage. It was my plan from the start to have Little Freak reach A support with Tsubaki so that he could become a Sky Knight through friendship. And this is why it was so important for Tsubaki to survive Chapter 7. By buying one friendship seal, this map becomes a lot more doable. That doesn't mean it's perfectly safe. In fact, I was worried that this strategy wouldn't even work. After all, a lot of the enemies on this map chase after Corrin, Xander included. Because Little Freak will be moving across the stage so slowly, there's a chance he'll die before reaching the escape point. He's not really capable of defending himself in this class. However, like I said, the enemies on this map rush Corrin, and it's one path that snakes through the entire map. If Little Freak stays close to my starting position, every enemy will rush towards my army, clogging up the pathways. All I have to do is use my other units to create a blockade on Corrin's starting tile. Of course, this does mean I can't pick up Caden, so he ends up dying. Since my units are a little bit weak, I can safely have Rinka and Saizo kill a few enemies for experience. Once Xander is close by though, I have the two unequip their weapons. The enemy AI isn't smart enough to shuffle around, so they'll clump around Rinka and never make an opening for Xander to attack. The grunts will obviously be able to attack and do some damage to Rinka, but her defense is high enough that she can survive enemy phase. And when player phase rolls around, Azama can easily heal her with a Festal. Thanks to the starting area now being so congested, it became safe for Little Freak to rush the escape point. It's still going to take multiple turns to reach the point, but now there's no empty spaces that Xander can reach. And this makes it impossible for him to rush back across the map in order to kill Little Freak. And even if he could move, he's simply too far away to reach me at this point. This situation also applies to any other enemy programmed to chase Corrin. As such, the escape went by without a hitch. There was also another benefit to this solution in that it gave Azama a chance to grind a little more healing experience, and it was enough for him to promote to Great Master before ending the chapter. This means he now has more versatility as both a healer and a fighter, not to mention coming one step closer to learning Renewal. Now, as we start off Chapter 13 huddled in the corner, I should probably mention the elephant in the room. We're not going to be able to collect anything from villages or chests. We simply lack the movement to reach them before the Outlaws. This has already been a problem on previous maps, but I wanted to point it out now, as this is the most painful map to watch it happen on. This means we end up missing out on a lot of useful items, including money the game expects us to have easily picked up. I do make up for this lost money by booting up the game every 6 hours to fight the free skirmishes, but I think it's important to recognize this issue that I can only partially remedy thanks to Birthright having access to skirmishes. As for the map itself, the start is pretty easy. By huddling up my units in the corner, I can safely handle all the enemies that immediately rush me. And while the enemy did plenty of damage, my units thankfully couldn't kill them in one round, so no one had to die from being too strong. Once the initial onslaught was handled, I slowly cleared out the enemy south of the river. This was also fairly safe, so long as I remained careful. The only problem would be Hans, but he thankfully didn't land a crit. All that left us with was Camilla and her entourage on the other side of the river. These guys will only start moving once Camilla does, and there are quite a few of them. As such, this is probably the hardest part of the map when you lack any movement. I chose to rely on having Kaze lure Camilla across the river. He wouldn't suffer the penalties from Camilla's bowbreaker and could easily tank her usage of Ragnarok. At the same time, Hinoka would lure and kill Baruka. The rest of the enemy would start rushing me on their next turn, and this is where things started falling apart. I only really thought through handling Camilla and didn't consider setting up my army to handle the onslaught that would follow. Had I been smarter about this, I would have set up some units to block choke points on the eastern bridge and behind the northernmost house. However, because I didn't, I nearly lost Azura. I was scrambling to keep her safe, as she was vital to the plans I had been concocting for Garen. Thankfully, she managed to survive by dodging a few attacks. From there, I was able to clean things up and finish the chapter without any losses. Seeing how my units were suffering at this point, I decided to take some time to grind experience. And during this time, Little Freak S-supported Rinka and learned camaraderie, after which he could finally become a mercenary. Soon enough, I was ready to handle Chapter 14, and this is where I finally put together my strategy to handle wide open areas. I ended up referring to this as the arrow formation on stream, but it's more of a triangle. The triangle would be made up of 3 layers: the heart, the middle, and the outer. The heart of the formation would always be Sakura, thanks to Quiet Strength providing 2 additional defense to all allies within range. Since the triangle consists of 2 layers, that means everyone benefits from this buff. As such, she's the beating heart that makes this defensive formation work. Sakura will keep units alive with healing, while also making them harder to kill. The outer layer, then, is a set of units 2 tiles away from Sakura. This layer is always filled out, so there's a defensive wall around her. The distance here is very specific to make sure that 2 range attacks don't hit her, while also making sure my units can be supported by her. However, because this outer layer always exists, this formation can only be safely created alongside things like map boundaries. Otherwise, my units will be spread too thin, and the enemy might be capable of reaching Sakura. As for what units fill this outer layer, it's mostly units with high defense that prefer one-range weapons. Units like Oboro, Hinoka, Rinka, Azama, and Korin. Of course, other units get switched in and out of this layer as need be, and some of them also have 2 ranged weapons in their inventories in case there are enemies that attack with ranged weapons themselves. Finally, there's the middle layer. These are the tiles adjacent to Sakura. Now, these spots don't have to be filled by my units, as this is just a buffer zone to protect my main healer. However, I can choose to put backup units here for various reasons. This could be a unit who can swap out with someone on the outer layer in case they need more time to heal or they're susceptible to the nearby enemies. However, a more common use for this space are weaker 2-range units. This usually means characters like Kaze or Takumi can stand around to help alleviate the turn economy on player phase. They can kill enemies adjacent to the outer layer, while my defensive wall focuses on healing themselves. There's also the chance of attracting the attention of ranged units, where they'll see a weak enemy and attack them even if they're capable of countering. This then brings otherwise troublesome enemies within range of my outer layer. We can see how well this strategy works as I easily handle the enemy outside of the border walls. Silas ends up being the only unit in danger of dying, but he does his job well, luring some of the enemy in range of Little Freak. Once the cavalry is taken care of, I have to slowly cross the map to approach Benny. I found the best way to handle this formation was to have Rinka shove Kaze closer to one of the knights. This would allow him to kill the knight with a sting shuriken before luring out and killing the Bolt-Axe Berserker. I could then kill the other knight and have Benny kill himself on Kaze. From there, Takumi could easily kill Charlotte, finally clearing the blockade around the entrance. With a bit of setup using swap and shove, I could then push Hinoka into Benny's previous position, now allowing her to use the blockade to kill off enemies in the entrance. I made sure to pair her up with Tsubaki so that he can provide her with more defense during all of this. He's already served his purpose in this run, so now he's just relegated to buffing Hinoka's stats. Once the entrance was cleared, I had Rinka and Little Freak enter the building. The 2 of them would lure out the enemy generals. However, because Hinoka has a lower defense, they would quickly switch their attention over to her. This allowed me to focus experience on Hinoka and Rinka while keeping the rest of my army safe. With the generals out of the way, it was then safe to clog the hallways with my units to clear out the remaining enemy. From there, Chapter 14 was pretty easy to finish. Chapter 15 worked out just like the start of the last chapter. All of the wolf skin will simply rush your army. As such, I can handle this map by sitting in place and keeping on top of my HP. And so long as I'm careful about how close the wolf signers are, I can actually use this map to grind experience on weaker units like Little Freak and Silas. Just like with every other map, once the reinforcements were handled, I could safely move forward and clear the rest of the enemy. This is going to be a trend for the next few maps. Because I adjusted well to the lack of movement, and most of my units were promoted at this point, there wasn't really much to challenge me. The palace was easy since the tight corridors allowed for complete control over the battlefield, and the fire orbs weren't an issue when there are units like Azama who have good mixed defensive stats. As for the Ice Tribe, I controlled whether reinforcements showed up since they're tied to entering houses. Leo was a free map since he just summons a bunch of weak faceless. It's just a case of waiting until Leo finally rushes you, and when he does, he ends up dying to Takumi. Afterwards is Sevenfold Sanctuary, but it also proves to be no problem as stairs don't cost movement and the gimmick in Birthright is very manageable, to the point that Takumi and Obito can handle most of the enemies on their own here. For Dragonfall then follows as another easy map. In fact, it's so easy that my level 13 Tsubaki can survive fighting the Faceless here. Of course, the acid will slowly damage us and summon infinite reinforcements, which would be an issue if the boss didn't rush your units after a set number of turns have passed. And even then, I was slowly progressing across the map. Whether or not the boss moved, this map would have been doable. It just would have taken longer. With such a long string of easy maps, you might be led to believe that this challenge is surprisingly easy, or even that it's not a challenge while playing Birthright. However, it all begins to fall apart the moment we enter the lava map. This map initially went under my radar, as it's super easy to skip past without thinking about it. In normal gameplay, you either memorize which dragon veins to use, or you just skip the gimmick entirely with a flyer. It's an extremely easy map with enemies that are fairly manageable. Issue is, I can't make use of either of these strategies. Flyers are beyond worthless without movement, and while I can technically reach the dragon veins in multiple turns, I don't actually have that time. Each section of the map has a hidden turn timer. Once that time is up, the section will become covered in lava and summon 3 waves of reinforcements. I don't have the movement to outrun these timers, and even if I did, these events still eventually trigger whether or not you use the correct dragon veins. However, this on its own is still pretty manageable. The bridges between sections will never turn into hazard tiles, so my units don't always have to lose 10% of their HP every turn. And for the most part, my units should be able to outlast the enemy on this map, especially if I make use of the holes, which will heal my units instead of damaging them. No, the real problem are the Stoneborn. These are monsters that do pretty decent damage and have an attack range of 1 to 5 tiles. However, their strength and ability to snipe you are normally balanced out by their low movement of 4. As such, you can normally run up to them after they attack you, easily taking them down and eliminating whatever threat they pose. But when you have no movement, these enemies are capable of attacking you while permanently staying out of your range. Essentially, these guys can slowly kill you without you being able to do anything about it. Now, if there were only 1 or 2 Stoneborn, it would still be possible to handle them. Whatever damage they pile on my units could probably be ignored. The problem is that there aren't just a few of these guys I can slowly handle on this map. They're part of the enemy reinforcements. Each set includes 2 Stoneborn per turn that immediately aggro on you. Given enough time, I'll be surrounded by these things. And that's how my first attempt ended. It was clear to me that the map wouldn't be possible as things currently were. I needed a proper strategy to handle these guys, and a little bit more defense to tank their attacks. So I took a break to complete the Kana paralogue. This map isn't a problem, as I just need to deploy units who can survive the onslaught. There's no need to worry about Kana, as she's always recruited whether or not she survives the map. What matters here is that my units were able to pick up a few more levels before returning to Chapter 21. Upon my return, I developed an actual plan, that being to wait out the reinforcements and tank them. Of course, this seems like a really stupid idea when reinforcements are what killed me last time. The big difference here is that I've prepped my units with concoctions this time around. Not to mention that 2 sets of my units are standing on holes, tiles that provide them with defense, avoidance, and healing. And this also helps to prevent a handful of reinforcements from appearing. However, I also quickly developed a strategy to deal with the Stoneborn, and that strategy is called turning Little Freak into a punching bag. Now, I won't claim to understand the inner workings of the enemy AI in Fates, however, I do understand the basic patterns, and the most basic of those is how the enemy will usually target the easiest unit to kill in their range. Because Little Freak is a lower level than my other units, he ends up having much worse defense and avoidance, making him my most killable unit. And even if he's on par with Silas, the enemy will still prioritize attacking Little Freak as he isn't buffed from standing on a hole. Since he's standing exactly 3 tiles away from my other units, and Stoneborn have a max attack range of 5, this means the Stoneborn have to enter the range of my units in order to attack Little Freak. As such, I now have the ability to kill Stoneborn without having to chase them down. Of course, this is also a rather volatile strategy, as I'm putting my lord in danger to lure the enemy into a trap. In one turn, they almost entirely deplete my health. However, this risk wasn't taken without mitigating the danger. Little Freak can be healed every turn thanks to learning Camaraderie during his short foray as a Sky Knight. And there's also the chance for additional healing from Good Fortune at the start of any given turn, though this healing is entirely up to luck. But the most obvious bit of safety is that Little Freak is my lord. As such, he can access the convoy at any time. And before starting this map, I bought a ludicrous number of concoctions. Because he's never going to have anyone in range to attack, Little Freak can instead spend his turns using healing items to keep his health topped up. With this strategy, I can slowly but surely clear out all of the reinforcements, thanks to them hating my lord. Probably because Little Freak caused the Boston Massacre or something. That's gotta be the lore in the game, right? There's no way they'd say this guy's a pacifist. Anyways, once the reinforcements were handled, I could safely make my way across the map to approach the boss, who is another Stoneborn. But this time, they're stuck in place, so I don't need to use any silly strats to lure them into range. Instead, I can just send in Hinoka and Azama, thanks to them being my highest defense units. With the boss defeated, I am finally free from Chapter 21. I would love to say that this was the hardest part of the game, but as I stated before, this is only where things begin to fall apart. Birthright's endgame without movement is hell, and this map is akin to something like Matador or Minotaur in Shin Megami Tensei. It's not actually hard in the grand scheme of things, it's just the skill check. However, it did leave me exhausted, so I took a break to handle some skirmishes and check out the Sophie Paralogue. And all I have to say about that is you're probably not saving her this late in the game. Once we finally move on to Chapter 22, we end up having to switch to solo strats. This is due to how Birthright endgame works, where maps will just throw a ton of guys at you. Usually that includes some reinforcements that appear right by your starting position, and most of the enemies on the map will rush you very quickly. Now, such a problem could be handled by multiple units. However, the enemy is made up of both magic and physical attackers, and a lot of my units either favor defense or resistance, not both. As such, I chose to only deploy Hinoka thanks to her balanced stats, and Little Freak is in her pocket as he's forcibly deployed thanks to his status as Lord. With only Hinoka on the field, dealing with Shura is very easy. It's a little bit annoying with all the ranged attackers in Ballista, however, much of the pain that could come with this map can be mitigated by injuring my opponents. When enemies are low health, they'll simply run away and station themselves next to a healer. And we'd seen this before on the boat map, and can take advantage of it here to kill annoying units like Shura. This is then followed up by the Camilla map. I was initially worried about this map, as it can be pretty annoying to do casually, and without movement, there would be no avoiding Camilla's Dragon Veins. However, thanks to watching better runners than me deal with this map under more normal circumstances, I realized I could just shove some units into this hallway we start next to. Which is to say, I absolutely stole this strategy from Kuro's Capturable Bosses run. Anyways, this just means I let Hinoka block a small hallway while most of the enemy rushed her. Little Freak would act as her backpack thanks to him being a required unit, and Sakura was the one Hinoka would be defending as I needed her to rescue Little Freak so he could reach Hinoka. Plus, Sakura provides healing and some buffs thanks to her personal skill. Takumi is also here and paired up with Sakura to provide some long-range support as needed. Since the enemy poses no danger to Hinoka, this map poses no issue. I just have to wait out the enemy and let them all die on her. Once they were dealt with, I'd have Hinoka swap out Little Freak for Sakura. This is due to the fact that I will have to cross the danger areas to reach Camilla. As such, having a healer with Renewal will make the trek a lot safer for her. This also means that if any enemies choose to rush Takumi, he has a unit with a one-range option paired up with him. This second phase for the Camilla map took a very long time. But it's because of this time sink that I chose to take things as carefully as possible, and it all paid off when Hinoka took Camilla down with ease. Of course, once Camilla aggroes, every other enemy on the map follows suit. However, I was prepared for this and killed most enemies before drawing aggro, so all danger was minimized and the chapter was easily cleared. Anyways, with all of that done, I have one thing to say. I hate Hans. There are a ton of reinforcements on this map, and I have to fight all of them. There's no way to rush Hans when I lack the movement to do so. However, this isn't an issue for Hinoka. She can solo all of the enemies on this map with little issue. That's going to be a given for the rest of the game. The actual problem here is reaching Hans. There's some stationary sorcerers between me and him. Now obviously these sorcerers and their fire orbs pose no issue for Hinoka as she loves capping her res. But there is someone here who is terrified of magic, and their name is Little Freak. This poses two problems. Hinoka needs a backpack unit who can help her reach Hans, which means they need to have the stats to survive those sorcerers. This is a problem that hasn't really come up until now, but it's vital we solve it if we want Hinoka to kill anyone. Otherwise, she's just gonna get stranded trying to reach her goal. The second problem is that Little Freak is pretty easy to kill. Now, that obviously wouldn't be much of a problem when Hinoka easily handles the map on her own. However, Little Freak is required to be deployed as her lord, hence why he was in Hinoka's pocket. But Hinoka needs someone else to help her cross the map, which means I need at least 3 units deployed, so I probably have to add a 4th unit to help keep Little Freak alive. But that brings us back to the reason why I've been soloing maps with Hinoka. She's my best unit, and the only one capable of tanking any enemy out in the open. As soon as anyone else is deployed, without some sort of environmental safeguard, they die. And if you look at this map, my units are out in the open. There is no saving them. Since even my second best units couldn't do much here, I decided to take a break and grind experience. Of course, experience alone wouldn't completely save my units. We're talking about late game enemies, so they'll still deal plenty of damage, even after I get units to a usable level 15. The other half of my preparations are entirely reliant on the units I chose. The other 2 units I've deployed alongside Hinoka are Oboro and Azama. This is important as they can equip lances. As such, I can provide them with Guard Naginata in order to greatly buff their defenses. Combine this with pumping them full of tonics, and they just might stand a chance. Thankfully, so long as I keep my health topped up, the enemy onslaught ends up being survivable. Once everyone who immediately aggroed was taken care of, I could switch up my pairings. Oboro would go from assisting Azama to holding onto Little Freak in a safe location. Meanwhile, Azama would now assist in Hinoka's journey to reach Hans. Since the 2 of them both have high res, the sorcerers have no chance to kill either of them. This makes the high damage berserkers near Hans the only real problem enemies, and maybe also Hans himself. Because of the silver star axe Hans has equipped, he can attack from 2 range, forcing Hinoka to use a bolt Naginata in order to do damage. Of course, this is dangerous with the weapon triangle advantage he has. It ends up allowing him to reduce Hinoka down to half health in 1 turn. And as a berserker, he has an innate crit chance that can't be completely nullified with the dodge stat built into the Spearmaster class. However, by being a bit careful and hoping he doesn't land a 30% crit, I can finish this map once and for all. This is then followed up by the Iago map, and just like before, I can't bring a ton of units along. This is thanks to the waves of reinforcements that show up during the first 5 turns here. All of the enemies that appear will be mounted units coming from the corridor you start the map in. Now, if it were just Great Knights, this wouldn't be an issue, as I have plenty of high defense units. But just like with Hans and his sorcerers, there are Dark Knights scattered among these reinforcements. So I need people who can survive both magic and physical attacks. Of course, if this map were just like the previous one, then I could bring along Oboro and Azama. However, there are a lot more enemies here that immediately rush you, and I don't have the safety of a wall behind my back. You might assume that I can huddle units up against the southern border of the map here, but I can't. And that's because of the entrapped strategist hiding behind the nearby generals. No matter how I choose to handle this map, that strategist will pull someone away to get killed by their formation. and if the generals don't kill them, then the reinforcements will. There'd be no time for said units to reconvene with the rest of my army, thanks to how quickly the cavalry will appear. This meant that if I wanted to survive the initial onslaught, I had to once again rely solely upon Hinoka. And she was thankfully capable of surviving so long as I fed her drinks from the convoy. Once all the reinforcements were handled, Hinoka and Little Freak could slowly make their way across the map to clear out the rest of the enemy. However, this map still isn't entirely safe. We still have the problem of a sorcerer using a fire orb, and it was an enemy just like this that made it impossible for Hinoka to solo the previous map with the assistance of Little Freak. However, there is a treasure room behind this sorcerer, and because of the one bit of thin wall, it would be possible to bait and kill the sorcerer through it. And because siege weaponry can't kill, that means Little Freak is mostly safe here. This would completely solve the issue if it weren't a two-part problem. See, upon nearing the chests, you enter the range of a second entrap strategist. This means that as soon as my units separate into this range, there's a chance the strategist will successfully kidnap one of them. Doing so would separate my units and hand me a soft game over, as I would have no way to move. And it's important to consider that my win condition is killing a stationary boss. That's not to say all is lost, though. Entrap isn't guaranteed to work. There's a chance the strategist will miss. However, it's still just a chance, and we're at the point where these maps take at least an hour to complete. Clearing the enemies up to this point in the map took something like 20 minutes to do. So I'll be clear in saying I used save states to test this point out. I didn't want to spend multiple hours throwing myself at this until I got a successful attempt. I think this was an acceptable use of save states as I was in a completely safe location and could easily mess with RNG, letting the sorcerer attack me with the fire orb. Of course, I understand if anyone has issue with that. I'm certain that with enough time, I could have found a more consistent strategy for this map, but at the very least, I want to prove it is technically possible. It did take a few attempts, but I eventually realized I was being a little stupid by equipping the Bolt Naginata on Hinoka. By equipping the Guard Naginata, she'll have an extra 5 resistance instead of 1. For those unaware, there's a secondary avoidance stat in Fates that I'll refer to as Magic Avoidance. Magic Avoidance is your ability to avoid offensive staves, things like the Hexing Rod, Entrap, Freeze, and so on. While normal avoidance is calculated based on your speed, Magic Avoidance scales with your resistance. To be more specific, every point of resistance is worth 1.5 points of magic avoidance. It's not much, but the difference between a Guard and Bolt Naginata would be 6 whole points of avoidance, or shaving 6% off the enemy's hit rate. Again, not much, but it made all the difference in the world, preventing the strategist from entrapping Hinoka. Of course, there's still more uses of that entrap staff, but Little Freak could now pair back up with Hinoka on the next turn. This now means that even if Entrap succeeds, neither of my units will be stranded as they're stuck together. And Entrap does end up succeeding on the next turn. The location this strategist brings us to is fairly dangerous with nearby berserkers, but Hinoka handles it no problem. And there is one benefit from this successful pull, that being how the strategist dropped us a few tiles away from the sorcerer. With just one separation, I would be within 2 range of the enemy. And thankfully Little Freak had enough HP that the sorcerer wouldn't immediately attack him, instead opting for his Fire Orb AI. This allowed me to safely take the sorcerer out. From here, I could fight Iago and immediately end the map. However, there was another reason for heading to the treasure room. On this map, there are 3 droppable chest keys, and 4 chests. And because no thieves appear here, I can actually collect something from these. I didn't care for most of these chests, only opening them to possibly sell the items. However, this chest right here was vital to my future strategies as it contains the water wheel. Thanks to my focus on using Spearmasters, I have a few units who can use the S-rank Naginata. What's great about the water wheel is that it's an extra Guard Naginata available to me, though it also has some further benefits. On top of the +5 defense resistance buff that they share, the water wheel also provides a massive 20 dodge buff. Combine this with the innate dodge bonus of the Spearmaster, and it becomes unlikely that any enemy will crit you. Of course, there is one major downside. Instead of having an avoidance debuff like the Guard Naginata, the water wheel will have the user's strength after combat. Thankfully, this isn't actually a problem. The water wheel more than makes up for this by having 14 more might than the guard Naginata, not to mention how the strength debuff will only affect every other combat. It's a completely manageable debuff and can even help prevent a unit from getting themselves killed by being too successful. With this powerful weapon now in my hands, I killed Iago, ending this horrible map. Which means it's now time to watch Xander kill Elise. Dealing with him in the aftermath of his own actions can be a problem in normal play if you don't have Lock Touch or never trained your Corrin. I would know this as I have, in fact, seen someone get brickwalled by Xander. However, this won't be an issue for me. In fact, unlike every other map I've handled so far, I can complete this one with just one unit. Little Freak. I don't need any backup, as using Lock Touch can mess with Xander's AI, and it's impossible to pair anyone with Corrin on the preparation screen here. Thankfully, Little Freak doesn't have to move in order to beat this map. After 8 turns, Xander will aggro. From there, Little Freak can stand still with a Kodachi equipped while chucking down healing items. In just a few turns, Xander will get himself killed on the Freak, making this the fastest map in the entire run. And getting me revenge for Chapter 1. From here, only 2 chapters remain, those being Garen and Endgame. Since there's no backing out once you enter Endgame, I had to hope that my units could handle the final map as they were. Though I can't get ahead of myself. Right now, I have to deal with Garen, and this is a map that I had been planning out since the beginning of the run. Unlike the past few chapters, I actually want to deploy all my units here. While this might seem like a terrible idea due to how far behind my other units must be at this point, I need them all here. And that's thanks to Garen and his 3-range axe. I need units to help me cross that range fast. But in order to get there, I need them to survive everything else. Which means it's time to bring back the arrow formation. Thankfully, my units have just the right stats to survive the initial wave of enemies. It is a bit scary for my lower defense units, but they pull through. However, this is then followed by some magical units, namely Malignites and Dark Knights. This poses a problem due to the low resistance of my army, but they thankfully focused their attacks on Kana. She managed to dodge them, and because she was inside the arrow, it left the magic users adjacent to my wall. You may note that there's an entrap strategist on this map, however, they pose no issue. Because almost every enemy rushes you on a timer here, the strategist ends up rushing me alongside the Dark Knights. The way enemy AI works is that they'll use an offensive staff if you're outside of their normal attack range. And because of how the strategist's movement works out, they'll never reach a point where one of my units is in range of their staff, but not their magic. Meaning, they'll never use entrap here. Once the enemy onslaught is handled, I can slowly make my way over to Garen. Of course, there are still some stationary enemies, but they can be handled no problem. The big issue here is Garen and the 2 units standing by his side. As things are, if I get a unit in range to attack Garen, the Maiden Sorcerer have a chance to debuff and kill them. This is part of why I wanted to bring along other units. By handing Takumi the Spy's Yumi that Shura came with, he can kill the 2 problem enemies from outside of Garen's range. This would then allow me to focus solely upon the boss without having to worry about any interference. Of course, as stated before, Garen is his own problem thanks to his range. Most of my units only get up to 2 range, meaning they'd have to deal with Garen attacking them before they can retaliate. And while Takumi can attack from the edge of Garen's range, he's not going to have a good chance at survival. However, by taking advantage of Swap, I can immediately drop a paired up Hinoka into Garen's range. From there, Rinka can shove Hinoka closer. Then, on my next turn, Kana can shove Rinka, who can then shove Hinoka into Garen. From there on, it's then possible to shove a healer in range to heal Hinoka before rescuing them. This strategy can only go on so long as I have rescue uses for saving my healers. However, because of the healing factor of the throne and Garen's weapon triangle advantage, it became clear this strategy wouldn't work out. That's when I realized I was being really stupid about this. See, Little Freak's stats aren't amazing. In fact, he's pretty killable. However, he has Axebreaker thanks to his time as a hero. By shoving him into range, I can easily fix the situation and let Little Freak kill Garen, ending the battle. I could have saved myself a lot of time if I sent him out in the first place, but it doesn't matter anymore. We're now stuck with a new problem: Endgame. Most people might not be aware of how this map works, and that's for good reason. It's really easy to rush Garen and win in a turn or two. However, I'm incapable of doing so thanks to my limited movement. As things are, I would have to slowly approach Garen, which is a terrible idea. Why is that, you may ask? Well, it's thanks to these dragon veins that nobody really seems to understand. Nobody except for me. See, Garen starts the map with 4 dragon veins near him. Upon activating one of them, an entire quadrant of the map will become permanently blighted. Upon the start of every enemy phase, anyone standing in the blight will take 10 damage that will then be absorbed by Garen, healing him. Of course, these veins wouldn't be here if the enemy didn't activate them, which means Garen will use them on turns 4, 5, 7, and 8. Once all dragon veins have been activated, Garen will finally attack your units. Thankfully, our starting area is the one spot that can't be blighted, meaning my units can easily stay at max HP. But the truth of the problem is that there are enemy reinforcements here, meaning Garen will be fully healed every turn. And even if the reinforcements aren't infinite, that doesn't matter as we can't outlast their spawns. If we allow Garen to blight the map, then he essentially becomes unkillable. Or, more accurately, I'd only be able to win if I can kill him in one turn. However, it's not possible to reach him before he starts using the dragon veins. I'm simply not fast enough, and I don't want to risk anyone getting caught in the blight. So that means I need a way to get him down from 78 HP to 0 in one turn. Or does it? See, there's one thing I failed to realize until now. Most bosses in Fates aren't actually immune to status ailments. In fact, only Gunter and Anankos in Revelation have this immunity. This means it's possible to use offensive staves on Garen here. Most of them are exclusive to Nor, making them nearly impossible to obtain. The only way to get something like Entrap or Enfeeble would be through an extremely lucky drop in a skirmish. However, Hoshido has access to one offensive rod that can solve all our problems. The Hexing Rod. By using one of these on Garen, I can have his HP from 78 to 39. This is also the only semi-permanent debuff in the game. As soon as someone's been hexed, their maximum HP will remain halved for the rest of the map. Seeing this small chance of a way forward, I set up 6 units to handle this map. Azama would be here to use the one hexing rod I had, and thankfully he managed to hit a 40% chance to hex Garen. From there, I didn't need him, so he and Tsubaki would then act as bait for the enemies, dying so that my other units could stay healthy longer. Speaking of my other units, there were Little Freak, Hinoka, Oboro, and Rinka. I fed all of them tonics and whatever stat boosters I had to maximize their chances of survival. I just needed them to last through turn 10, where Garen would finally approach them. Because of the small distraction Azama and Tsubaki provided, they managed to pull through. Thanks to messing around with my unit positioning, once Garen attacked, I could shove Little Freak in range to deal the killing blow. With Garen defeated, I suppose it's time to go over the final results of this challenge. Now, if we look over all the story maps we've done, I said you can beat 4 out of 6 of the tutorial maps. As for the maps in Birthright, we get a perfect 100% completion of all 23 story maps, from Chapter 6 through Endgame. So, depending on how you choose to look at this, you can certainly say that it's possible to beat Birthright without movement. However, it's not possible to beat Fire Emblem Fates itself without movement. All thanks to Xander. Chapter 1 is really our major block point. It's the only map where you get one unit, and even if you had more, you wouldn't be able to use pair-up strats to reach and kill Xander. Combine that with Xander being immobile, and this map is truly impossible. If we were somehow able to skip this map, then our 2 major problems would be chapters 2 and 5. Both chapters are theoretically possible if you have extremely good luck. However, should you lack this luck, then I found chapter 2 to be possible on normal mode with female Corrin. As for chapter 5, you'd need to have fairly good luck with both Ryoma and your own units to win. I personally haven't seen this luck play out while using this mod, but it is hypothetically possible. However, that's under the assumption you're playing on hard mode. You see, while I spent many months writing out this script, I've been messing with this chapter. It still holds true that I've yet to see perfect luck here. However, I have now tried out chapter 5 on normal. I've been holding onto a save from this challenge, and by using a save editor, I was able to set it to normal mode. What I found was that the enemies on this map are easily handled by Rinka and Kaze, even when you consider the utter lack of experience both of them gained in Chapter 4. So, assuming Ryoma has good enough luck to defeat the boss, this map is guaranteed possible on normal mode. Issue is, Ryoma died while I was testing this map out, so I decided to see if it was possible to beat this map without his help. Sadly, Rinka and Kaze are both incapable of defeating the boss. They simply lack the strength to do so. And without movement, Little Freak can't do much as he can't use pair-ups on this map. However, we have a secret powerhouse on our team, Azura. As a songstress, she can sing once per turn. By singing, she'll gain some experience. However, as she reaches a higher level compared to whoever she's singing to, she ends up gaining less. This drop continues until she eventually only gains 1 experience per song. This is fine though, as there's no turn limit on this map. It just means you have to spend several hundred turns and many grueling hours leveling Azura up. I ended up using a 100 experience cheat to speed up this process. Mostly because I've done this grind plenty of times before, and I was more so curious if it was even possible for Azura to kill the boss. However, with him having 24 defense, I needed quite a bit of strength on Azura. Thankfully, I just needed her to reach 17 strength. Combine that with her breast Naginata and a Rinka pair-up, and she'll have a total attack power of 25. This would allow her to do exactly 1 damage. However, that on its own isn't enough to win. I need everyone alive so that I can get Azura in range of the boss without her or Rinka dying. This involves letting Kaze die to protect Rinka. And even after all that, that's not enough to guarantee the victory. Azura's HP and defense growths are pretty bad, so she's not very likely to have good enough stats to survive multiple blows from the boss. Thankfully, we have a few things on hand to help solve this problem. The first is the HP tonic an enemy mercenary drops on this map. Using it on Azura will give her 5 more HP to work with. Next, I want Sakura standing nearby. By having her 2 tiles away from Azura, she'll be able to safely heal my songstress every turn. Of course, her healing isn't going to be great as she's level 2, but it'll allow Azura to survive that much longer. Not to mention that Sakura will provide her personal buff that will decrease the damage Azura takes. However, even with all of this, Sakura can't out-heal the damage, which is why we also need the vulnerary Kaze provides us with in Chapter 4. Thankfully, I never used them, so Azura has 3 whole vulnerary uses. All I needed to do was have her use them whenever Sakura's healing wasn't enough to put Azura beyond the death threshold. By combining all of these things, Azura was able to survive long enough to kill the boss, which means it's possible to beat Chapter 5 on normal mode without Ryoma. So, looking back over everything with this new knowledge, I can say with certainty that Xander is the only thing preventing us from beating Birthright without movement. 23 out of 23 Birthright maps are possible with this challenge on hard mode, and 3 out of 6 of the tutorial maps are possible on hard. However, if you instead play on normal, then it should be possible to beat 5 out of 6 pre-Branch of Fate maps. And honestly, I'm rather surprised by these final numbers. I didn't expect this many maps to be doable on hard mode. I assumed that at some point outside of the tutorial, I'd have to lower the difficulty to normal. But by being resourceful, I found that most every map is possible on hard. Looking back on this journey, it was kind of fun playing through the game with this restriction. Of course, it got painful towards the end, and I would never recommend anyone try this out. However, if you're interested in one-upping me by completing maps on higher difficulties or trying maps I didn't do, then the link to the mod will be in the description below. I have no plans to try this challenge on Conquest, so if anyone better at the game than me wants to try it out, be my guest, and also tell me how it goes. As for Revelation, I might actually try it out myself. I'm certain that some maps are impossible, but I'd be interested in seeing just how much of the game can be played without the most vital stat. Until then, though, I think I'll play some stuff that's easier on the soul.